Okay friends, let us now talk about 2D arrays in C. A 2D array is like a table or grid that stores data in rows and columns. For example, you can use it to represent a chessboard or a classroom of students. Each item is accessed using two indices, one for the row and one for the column. In implementation, this is simply going to be an array which contains sub-arrays in them. That means it's an array of arrays in other words. 2D arrays help organize complex information clearly and make calculations easier. Let's now see a code example in which we will have a program that loops through a 2D array and prints all elements and sub-elements in it. So first, I will declare a 2D integer array named scores and initialize it with 2 rows and 3 columns. So it's an integer scores. So for the initialization and declaration of a 2D array, it is very similar to what we had with an array of strings. So we have the first set of brackets in which we are going to specify the size of the mother array or the main array. The size of this main array is going to be 2 for my example. And then after this, I will write another set of brackets in which I will specify the size of each sub-array which will be contained in my main array. So each sub-array I want to be the size of 3. Now I can initialize this directly. I will first write my main array which will be within braces. And as I said, a 2D array is going to be an array of arrays or an array which contains sub-arrays. So it means inside this my array, instead of having normal integers like 2 or 3, we are going to have entire arrays as elements instead. So the first element will be the first array which will be written within braces, so, and then I'm going to give integer elements to this array now. So we set the data type of this 2D array is int, meaning that even though it's an array of arrays, the elements inside the sub array need to be integers. So for that reason, I will give some integer values inside here. Okay, so this is for the first element or the first array of my 2D array. As we said, the value 2 represents the size of this array, meaning the maximum number of sub-arrays that can be contained inside our 2D array. So for that reason, I can add a second one. And I'm also going to give it 3 elements because 3 is the maximum size of, or the maximum number of elements that can be stored within any of the sub-arrays. Now let's use a for loop to display the elements and the sub-elements of this array. When I talk about the elements, I mean the arrays contained within the 2D arrays, and the sub-elements are going to be the actual values inside our sub-arrays. Now we also said 2D arrays are arrays that store values in rows and columns. So the rows we talk about are simply the sub-arrays, while the columns are the values inside these sub-arrays. So let's first start by looping through the rows of the 2D array using a for loop. I will give a bit of space before the for loop. As we see inside my for loop, I am initializing I from 0, and then my condition is I less than 2, then I plus plus. This is because our array scores has 2 main elements inside of it, and we are going to pass through each of these elements one at a time. Now when we are inside the first, or we are accessing the first sub-array, which is this first one that I have highlighted for example, we will also need another for loop in order to iterate or loop through the individual elements inside of this sub-array. So for that reason, we will have an embedded for loop or another for loop inside this our main for loop. So I will simply say for this time, since we already use I inside the initial for loop, for the sub for loop or the embedded for loop, I will use the integer j this time around. You can use whatever letter you want of your choice, but it's just usually common to use I and j together. But as I said, you can use what you like. And remember that we are starting our initialization of I and j because array indexes begin at 0 and not 1. So for example, inside our array of scores, the first array, which is this highlighted one, is going to be the value at index 0, while the second array is going to be the index 1. And now inside of our first array, we have a first element. So this first element is going to have the index of 0 and 0 because it is found within the array at index 0, and it is also the first index inside the array at index 0. On the other hand, our value 80 is going to have an index which looks like it is within the first array, so it is going to have 0 as its first index, while the second index will be 1 because it is the second element of this first array. Now for something like our value 85, our index is going to look like it is found within the second array, which is at index 1, so it is going to have the first index as 1, whereas it is the third element of this second array. So the third element, if we know that we are counting the indexes from 0, the first element will be at index 0, while the second will be at index 1, and the third will be at index 2. So it is the third element here, and the index is 2. So this is going to be how the index of this element is represented. So using this knowledge now, we are going to understand better these nested for loops. So I am initializing j from 0, and I am checking the condition j is less than 3 because each of our sub-arrays have 3 elements, remember. Now let's print the score at the current row and column. So this is our printf message which we have written. We have this I within the brackets represents an index of the main array, while the j within brackets represents an index of the sub-array of I. So in our first iteration, we know that our I is 0, while j is 0 also. So in this place, it is similar to writing for this first iteration score of 0 and 0, and we know that 0 0 is going to give the value 95, and we are going to keep iterating over and over. We know that we have a nested for loop here, so the sub for loop, which is the one with the j variable, is going to complete a successful complete iteration, which means it is going to iterate 3 times before we move out for the second iteration of the outside loop. So let's now run our program to see what we get as result. And we can see our given indexes or values at each index is displayed. We have score at 0 0 is 95, score at 0 1 80, and so on till the final one, which is score at 1 2, which is 85. So you can check all these values and you will see that they are displayed exactly in the order in which they are supposed to be displayed. You can go through the program again for further understanding or better understanding if there's anything you miss, and if you still have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. And that is how to use 2D arrays or nested arrays in C programming language.